Snapshots, a series by Tom Spoken, Episode 3, Mix Car Amusement. Gunnery Run was the perfect road for racing. The plants outside of town were a rust skeleton of the steel behemoth they had once been. So little work meant few trucks and none past quitting time, the time when a crowd would start to gather. A steady climate, combined with minimal through traffic, leaves you with pristine blacktop. The past need for peak efficiency meant all those inconvenient rolling hills had been carved apart in the name of flat and steady freight routes. Tall pines lined the full 2 miles of straight, keeping the roar of hybrid engines from prying ears. Not that this meant they were never caught, but catching a race at Gunnery Run would never be a problem. For Danny, these were all secondary benefits. Many roads in Hunts County would tick most of these boxes. What made it perfect was the sunset. The end of Gunnery Run opened into the treeless expanse left by the glory days of a manufacturing past. This meant, with an east to west alignment, that for several weeks in summer, the height of racing season, the sun ended its day on their finish line. Some would find the prospect of driving into the sunset every night a little hackneyed. Not Danny. If something was good once, it would be good again. He liked things simple, except for cars, of course. He watched the sun ease its way to the horizon, leaning on the hood of his car. He'd heard once that Eskimos had 100 words for snow. Well, they'd need 1,000 for the shades of orange in this sunset, he thought to himself, as he sat in observance of this glory no language could describe. Thunder could be heard. Thunder from a cloudless sky. A train of quicksilver proceeded down the run, each perfect car sliding into its own perfect sidings along the road. As engines cut, thunder was replaced by earthquaking bass from a multitude of precision sound systems. The heartbeat of race night. A welcome sound to Danny's ears. He maintained his watch as more cars joined and a sea of familiar faces began to emerge. People came and went from Danny's spot, with greeting and chatter of the latest and greatest in racing. "Yo, Danny, you hear about that crazy shit the guys at Sound Performance rolled out last weekend? Hey, Danny, you see Marty's got the new Pirellis in? Danny, I heard your brother gave in and bought a slush box. Tell me it ain't true." Danny went back and forth with each and every one of them in good nature, but internally all the talk washed over him. His mind was focused on the road. That was until a couple of worthwhile distractions came his way. The first came in the form of his best friend, Chris. "Let me guess, first one here again? Ain't no way you got this prime real estate otherwise." Danny smiled as he turned to greet his brother in all but blood. "I'll never pass up the chance to see the sunset." Hands clasped and a quick arm around the shoulder, the pair then admired the scene before them. "You keep your sunsets. This is what I want to see for the rest of my life," Chris replied, before turning to survey Danny's Mustang. "And how's old lady running?" addressing the car in the tone of one visiting a revered elder aunt. Danny's eyes rolled at Chris's theatrical salutations. "Old lady's running just fine, thanks." He couldn't remember when his dad had first started calling her old lady. Maybe it was before Danny's earliest memories. Maybe before he was even born. Regardless, that was her name, and her name lived on in the local scene. His dad lived on in the car too. Danny found it strange how he'd sometimes see cars as he rolled through town, younger than him, but rusting and falling apart. Yet somehow his dad had been gone 7 years, and his car of 20 looked to have just rolled off the lot. Somehow was the wrong word. The cause was well known to Danny through days, months, years of time and effort bled into the car. A worthy sacrifice, first alongside his father, and now alone. Friends often offered help, in the upkeep, but with his dad gone, he couldn't abide another in the garage with him. Beast is running fine, thanks for asking, Chris words snapping Danny out of his daze. Danny grinned. From what I hear, it wasn't so beastly Tuesday night. Chris frowned before retorting in good humour. Well now, don't be blaming the beast. There were extenuating circumstances. Such as, Danny probed. Such as, there was a squirrel in the road right as I was about to take the lead. I couldn't in good conscience kill one of God's creations now, could I? Danny stood firm, clearly expecting more to come. Chris sighed before relenting. And I may have got caught sleeping on the tree. Danny laughed, softly slapping Chris's back. Goddamn flatfoot. Chris was quick to shove Danny back. Play fighting quickly ensued. As they tussled back and forth, one of the newer racers in the local crowd sidled over. Jake. Chris and Danny knew the name, but not the person. Yo, Chris. The casual greeting felt unnatural in his Moneyside accent. The pair broke off their epic clash to face the newcomer, neither showing welcome nor hostility. Sup, was all Chris mustered in response, though Danny could tell he was amping up the cold front for effect. He fought back a smirk and matched the vibe, face blank. Jake continued, hesitantly. You gonna race today? 'Cause, the shop just installed my new parts, and Danny knew Chris was thinking the exact same thing as him. They loathed anyone who didn't fit their own mods. It was as much a part of this whole thing as the racing itself. How can you know the car if you can't even do the work to get it race ready? I don't know, man, Chris cut across Jake's rambling. I was maybe going to sit back and watch tonight. Like a spider to a fly, thought Danny. Come on, man, Jake said. I've been practicing and I really want a rerun of last time. Nah, man, Chris jumped in again. You did good with what you had, trailing off with painfully obvious purpose. The bait was taken. I think I can win, though. I think I can get you this time, Jake came back with newfound confidence. Its source clearly a reaction to the words Chris hadn't needed to say just then. Chris shrugged, his reticence truly pantomimed to Danny's knowing eyes. I'll even give you the hit, the words fleeing Jake's mouth like a bolted horse. From his eyes, he'd even surprised himself, but his expression quickly returned to unearned confidence. How much? Chris was quick on the chase. To the dead tree, Jake replied, looking to say more, but he wouldn't get the chance. All right, see you at the line, brother. Chris was yards away and rolling to the start line before Jake could even realise something may be amiss here. As he crawled by Danny, Chris mouthed through the window, grinning ear to ear every damn time. Danny couldn't help but be internally impressed by his friend's ability to play people. Probably because he never really did it to anyone who wasn't asking for it in the first place. The rich, the arrogant, those on the con themselves. And in fairness to Chris, it had come from a place of necessity in the early years. A wrong-sider by birth, at least in the eyes of the older generation. If he wasn't having to evade the older kids prowling his block by word or by fleet of foot, he was moving around what little money he'd scraped like Pablo Escobar, keeping it from the prying hands of his down-on-luck, high-on-substance parents. It wasn't their fault, but then nor was it his, and he had a brother to keep fed and clothed. The quiet and pensive Danny had been caught by the glamour on day one in elementary school, seeing Chris navigate both class and playground like a diminutive socialite. An alien skill to Danny. He wouldn't say he wanted to be like Chris. He just liked the company of someone so different to him. As he reminisced on the unflappable nature of his best friend, a voice came from over his shoulder, soft and warm. Is some poor fool about to get walked by Chris again? Danny smiled and nodded as Sophia perched beside him on the hood of his car. Sophia knew racing. She would never get behind the wheel herself, but in a town where everyone else did, it was either stay home or become part of the world. But the words never rang true when she spoke them. Not like Jake, with his dad's money and poseur approach. It was something else Danny struggled to define. Not mocking, no, and not disdain either. Though she'd wince at the near misses and the roar of the engines, that was purely out of genuine fear for her friends. Was it disappointment? Like a sadness that everyone she knew held their lives in such little regard. Like the failed to comprehend what it would do to her should they die on the road. Yet the words were never spoken. Instead, they hid in the tone behind her talk of racing. They sat in comfortable silence as the cars lined up, shout of encouragement coming from both parties' support. "Let her eat, Chris," Sophia cried. She really wanted him to win, but she didn't want him to race. The first flag drops, and Chris is away. Clean start, engine roaring, and he's at the dead tree before his exhaust smoke has cleared. Second flag, Jake is slow off the start, and it looks like a done deal. Danny is about to turn to Sophia when he hears the hissing and deepening roar coming from Jake's car. In a moment, Jake is on Chris, whose car has nothing more to give. Has he really been outgamed by someone playing with Daddy's money? Danny thought in disbelief. His doubts are quickly dismissed by the telling pop of Jake's newly minted NOS leaning out. His car rolled to a stop and Chris continued his glide across the finish line. Danny laughed. Closer than he'd expected, but relieved his friend's payday had come in. He turned away from the race as the cheers erupted from the crowd, peppered with laughter and derision at Jake's miserable loss. His gaze locked with the deep brown eyes of the girl he went to sleep thinking about most nights. She smiled, maintaining her stare. Danny felt like those eyes could strip him away to nothing, yet he'd be in comfort for every moment of it. Hey, she replied. I've got something for you, Danny continued, leaning into the driver's side window of his car. Money? Diamonds? Sophia said in a toying fashion. Plane tickets to the other side of the world? Danny couldn't help but feel the last one wasn't a joke. He returned to the front of the car with a cassette case, a mixtape. Summer stuff in his handwriting on the label. He'd always thought it was scratchy and hard to read. Pour moi? Sophia gasped, as if prevented with gold bullion. She rocked backwards and bounded from the hood into the grass, spinning in slow circles as she read the list of artists and songs on the inner leaf. You impress me, Mr. McKellen. I've heard one of these bands. Just one. She presented her index finger to emphasize the magnitude of this fact. And 0 of these songs. Her hand moving to form a similarly emphatic circle. I shall take great delight in deconstructing your musical taste to work out just exactly what is going on in there. A soft poke of her finger against his forehead, accompanying her final statement, before she danced away from him once more. The smell of her perfume lingered, like a honeyed memory. Funny how little it takes to make a heart pound, Danny thought to himself. Every time he saw this girl was a feat of willpower to resist the urge to drop to one knee and ask her to marry him. And they'd never so much as kissed. I hope you like it, he said with a soft smile, her attention once more on the cassette cover, as if she held the most fascinating novel in her hands. Still driving a relic, then? A cold, unfunny voice, all sneer and no soul, came from further up the road. Alex, the only person Danny could think of worth the effort of hating. He shifted his attention with great reluctance from Sophia to the new arrival. Clearly, was Danny's response, arms spread as if showcasing his car, his voice containing a genuine coldness few would hear from him. You ready to lose? Alex asked. Danny's response could have been anything, in any tone, and it would never have fazed Alex. He had the assuredness of one with genuine wealth, more than anything Jake could muster, and the arrogance of one who felt deserving of such privilege. The lack of welcome was of no concern to him. Alex was always where he was supposed to be, at all times. Unlike many with such traits, he did not drag around an entourage of sycophants. Danny would give him that. Being an asshole was a solo activity for Alex. Pretty sure I won last time, but sure, Danny turned to get into his car, Sophia backing away from the hood. The abrupt end to the conversation was wholly expected by all parties, in fairness. Danny knew he'd rise to the bait and didn't care. Alex wouldn't have cared had he been refused or accepted in his challenge. And Sophia knew there wouldn't have been anything she could say to convince Danny not to race. Danny rolled up to the line, engine rumbling. Old Lady was as eager to get this done as he was. As he sat there, fingers drumming impatiently on the steering wheel, Alex pulled in beside him. This was new. Pink pearlescent. Japanese, of course. So new you could be forgiven if you thought you could smell the docks on it. No doubt there was a bottle in there somewhere, Danny thought, but that was too much car for Alex. The sun was gone now, so one of the regular crowd sidled into the centre with the light. As the girl set herself between the two cars, Danny noticed from the corner of his eye Alex opening his door. He seemed confused, unheard of for him, and was staring intently at the front drive side of the car, as if scanning for damage. As Danny turned to pay attention, the crack came from Alex's car, door closing at the sheer force of taking off from the line. Body overtook brain, and Danny was off a split second after. Idiot, he thought to himself. Stupid idiot. Too late now. A chase is a race, and so he had no choice but to pursue. The gap was almost non-existent as they reached the halfway. Danny could still get this in spite of falling for what was now an obvious gambit. But a lesser driver had played him, and the lesser driver had a bottle. The NOS kicked in, and Alex was gone. By the finish, the gap was a bus length. Well, it had been entertaining for the crowd at least. This was Danny's first thought on exiting the car at the finish line, shouting and cheering all around him. It was some comfort to note how many in the crowd weren't celebrating. Alex was far from popular with the veterans of the scene. Ignorant of the plaudits, Alex only had eyes for Danny, making a line for him as he checked his car's exterior. Like a book, Danny, like a book. Though his eyes were still on his car, Danny could hear the grin on Alex's face. No bottle and you're last past the tree was Danny's reply, though he hated himself for making what sounded like an excuse. Well, Alex's voice fading into the crowd. Maybe I send you your own for Christmas. See how much better you really are. Goddamn right, sir. Chris spat his words as he clasped a hand on Danny's shoulder in commiseration. Danny was uncomfortable with that word, but didn't call his friend out on it. Alex was indeed fiendish in his pursuit of the latest tech from the Japanese market. Besides, he knew his best friend's argument would be to list everything he'd been called in their hometown. A hard case to counter. Still, man, Chris continued, how are you falling for those playground tricks? Danny laughed wryly. He couldn't help but be amused at his own foolishness, but also the weakness of his own friend's position to ask such a question. This coming from the man who bought NOS last year, which turned out to be a scuba diving tank and a bad paint job. Chris held up his hands, surrendering to fair challenge. Still, though, why'd you let him get to you? Danny sighed. Very simple, buddy. Because he's an asshole. True, Chris chimed in support. All right, man. I'm going to get out of here. Something tells me the cops will be making the rounds later, and I do not want to be here for that. Chris did have a habit of being the first to get caught, although Danny felt this was due to forces outside of his friend's control. There were definitely slower cars and worse drivers here. Chris hugged a slowly approaching Sophia as he departed. She came and leaned against the side of Old Lady. I'm going to shoot too. My friends are heading back to town. There was sadness in her voice. It was always there when they spoke after he'd raced. She was happy, he knew. They had the chance to speak again, of course. It was the existence of a scenario where they could never speak again, in fact, that brought her down. "Okay, I'll see you soon," Danny replied. He knew any offer of a lift would be declined, so he held back. As she walked away, Danny's heart sank. He couldn't tell if he felt worse for chasing the jump or for making a girl like Sophia sad. No, he felt worse for the fact he couldn't decide between the two. Weekend mornings, an extension of the race ritual. Danny was at prayer, leaned over the engine of his car in quiet observance. In spite of his lack of thinking in the previous evening's race, some clarity had prevailed, and there were things he wanted to change in readiness of his next race. It was as if Old Lady sang to him in the height of the race, and only his keen ears could pick up the slight imperfections in the notes, waverings in the bass felt as his soles touched the pedals. These hidden things told him all he needed to improve, chase perfection. Danny's reverent solitude was disrupted by the squeak of the interior door to the garage. His stepdad, Keith, sidled in, beer in hand, of course. The decay of the manufacturing scene left many a victim, Keith being one of them. Danny found it hard to find sympathy in Keith's case. Town was small and character was easy to know for most. With Keith, the drink had been around long before the factories failed. In Danny's mind, even a pleasant drunk was unpleasant, and Keith wasn't that. He couldn't really understand what his mum saw in the relationship, other than some vain hope to rekindle a high school romance. They dated back then, before she'd had the sense to marry Dad. Regardless of the facts surrounding the matter, one thing Danny knew to be true: Keith was an irritation. More so when he dared enter the garage, his father's sanctum. He could feel Keith's eyes on him, simmering disgruntlement, disapproval. Danny continued to focus on Old Lady, not even acknowledging the man's existence. The first poke came. "You bought more stuff for that thing?" Danny didn't reply. The second poke. "How can you even afford this stuff?" "I work," Danny replied. "Work?" Keith scoffed. "Work where?" "The bar." "Bullshit. You ain't 21. "I collect glasses. Clean up." Danny's voice without a hint of disguise to his disdain. A pause followed. The only sounds the light tinkering of Danny at his work and the huffing breath of a man close to double digits on beers before lunchtime. "You selling drugs?" "No," Danny replied, no change in his tone. "Well, you're always hanging around with that black kid," Keith said, as if discovering the ultimate response to completely dismantle any denial. Danny rose from his work. Keith's mouth stopped, half open. He was reconsidering whatever he'd been about to say. He was big. From what Danny had seen in the bar one night, when Keith was too drunk to even remember his presence, he was mean too. But he was unsure how mean Danny might be. Hell, Danny was unsure on that too. If Keith had used the word Danny had heard that night in the bar, they may have found out together. Instead, Keith faded back through the door, scowling, while the man left the stench of beer remaining. Danny returned to his work. Rain. This was an unnecessary statement from Chris. Both he and Danny were watching the same scene from the side of Gunnery Run. Slow drizzle coming down across the tarmac. It had been hot all day. Likely, this was a precursor to something much bigger later that night. In the meantime, the air was thick and the smell of steaming tarmac cooled by the rainfall. "You haven't done much in the rain," Danny stated, having just heard Chris intent to race. "You sure you want to do this?" "Easy money, man. Easy money," Chris said with his usual self-confidence. "Jake is desperate to get back up on me after last week, and I ain't about to discourage that thinking. Flat feet, can't shift, doesn't know when to quit. The perfect combination for me, he laughed. I don't know, Danny said doubtfully. It's getting heavier. Chris scoffed. You sound like Sophia. That should probably tell you something, Danny replied. Chris waved his concerns away like stormflies and headed back to his car. His walk became a jog as Jake was already pulling up to the line. Danny watched him splash his way through the puddles at the side of the road. He couldn't help but think the sinking sensation he felt right now was exactly what caused that sadness in Sophia's eyes each time they raced here. If it was, he owed her 1,000 apologies. The cars lined up, ready to go. Jake's monstrosity looking comical next to the understated speed of Chris's Camaro. Nothing more to be done now, Danny thought. Just got to let him race. The flash came, and the cars were off, chasing the beams of their own tail lights down what felt like an endless road in the dark. Chris was away fast again, Jake trailing. Maybe his logic was sound, Danny reconsidered, as Chris continued to pull away. Maybe Chris would be fine and Jake was about to get absolutely treed. Then Danny's mind took him back to last week's race, and the sinking feeling in his gut returned. Jake's about to get desperate. Don't do it, Danny muttered to himself. You're not cut out for this, don't do it. The hiss came as Jake flipped the switch on his NOS. He rocketed forwards, quickly gaining on Chris. But power like that and rain like this didn't make a good couple, not if you're a driver with no clue. Jake was quickly riding the line, the back end of his car all over the road. Then he was spinning. His car cleaned out Chris's like it wasn't even there, sending his Camaro barreling off across the grass. The rain made it impossible to stop, and soon he was in the trees. Jake skidded to a halt in the centre of Gunnery Run, his car looking like nothing had happened. Danny was sprinting to the tree line, slipping on the slick grass and fighting against the crush of people racing back to their cars. As he got closer, he heard the shrieking of tyres and looked down the run to see Jake fleeing at speed. Coward was all he could think, before pushing it out of his mind as he pushed towards his friend. As he got to the car, deep past the tree line, he could see smoke was rising from the engine. The chassis was twisted, an ugly mass of angles and jagged spars. Chris was much the same on first inspection, but Danny could only handle him with so much care as he dragged him violently from the vehicle. The smoke and the heat were growing. As he got his best friend clear of the woods, the car went up in flames, the rain doing little to combat the blaze. He laid Chris on his back on the sodden ground and checked for signs of life. Pulse weak, breath there but faint. His legs were at bad angles, gashes to his face and chest, and he wasn't conscious. Danny hated himself for questioning if he'd even make it, but it was hard not to, seeing what he saw. Rain continued to pour down on them. "Chris!" Danny had never heard such a savage scream. Startled, he turned to see Sophia running towards them. Now seeing the surroundings for the first time, in his tunnel vision for Chris, Danny had not noticed how quickly and completely everyone else had cleared out. A tinge of disgust hit him at their lack of concern for Chris. He'd been in it as long as any of them. Some of them knew him, really knew him, and they'd left him to die. Sophia collapsed to her knees beside them. "Is he dead? Is he dead?" She grabbed Danny forcefully, shaking him. "Danny, is he dead?" Danny shook his head, mute as the fading adrenaline from Chris's rescue left him hollow and exhausted. He hugged Sophia close to him as she heaved uncontrollably in rhythm with her sobbing. The sounds of her crying seemed dulled to Danny's ears. Shock was setting in, and the world felt, looked, and sounded like he was encased in bubble wrap. Blurred vision made out clouds of blue and red drifting towards them. Sirens a muted howl as they skidded to a halt alongside them. Sophia must have called them, he thought. Then hands were dragging him away and he felt as if he was floating. Chris survived the night, then the next one, and the next. 2 weeks had passed, and he'd even woke a couple of times, according to his family. The hospital wouldn't allow visitors beyond relatives, but his brother kept Danny up to speed. When first he'd heard Chris may never walk again, he'd thrown up. When, a week later, he'd heard Chris had twitched a toe, Danny cried for the first time since elementary school. He hadn't even cried when his dad died. But this was joy, and that was sorrow. It was Friday, and the sun was setting at Gunnery Run. Danny sat alone on the hood of Old Lady. The perfect road for racing hadn't seen a single car capable of getting up past 70 until Danny's today. It had been more than a month, and still, Danny's car would be the only one. The police had clamped down hard since the crash. They were ticketing and confiscating cars for anything and everything. This was backlash from their inability to charge Danny with anything in connection to the crash, not deep concern for the injured. In fact, they'd even tried to charge Chris, until the local paper caught a whiff of it. It had been a full 2 weeks before he saw Sophia after the crash. Chris may not have died that night, but the hope of anything coming to pass between her and Danny had. A fair trade, Danny thought, but a bitter one nonetheless. The conversation had been short, the air cold. She was going away to college. She'd known for a while but hadn't said anything. It was on the coast, so she wouldn't be back much. She'd returned the mixtape. "It wasn't for me," she said, as her fingers glanced against his skin in handing it back. It felt like she meant more than just the music. The way her fingers flinched at the touch, reinforcing this in Danny's mind. She hadn't begged him not to race anymore. That surprised him. Danny felt like the conversation had been one between an addict and a family member who has finally given up. Written them off as a lost cause who'll only pull others down with them if they hang around. He couldn't blame her, but that didn't mean he wouldn't miss her. Alex had footage from the race and was more than happy to share. News like that travelled fast in a town like theirs. There was even word it was up on the internet. Danny was going to handle that tonight. Tomorrow, he'd get to see Chris for the first time since the crash. All that could wait. For now, he slid into the driver's seat of his Mustang. The engine roared as Old Lady came to life. The trees on Gunnery Run shielded the outside world from the noise. It was just for him. He rolled slowly onto the blacktop, flawless and laid out in a perfect straight before him. The distant thunder of the idling engine, a prelude to a tune he knew better than any other. A pang of guilt hit Danny as he realised there was probably nothing he loved now, or ever would, more than the feeling of being behind this wheel. The feeling passed. The clutch lifted, tyres cracked, and Danny drove off into the sunset. It was good once, he thought, smiling as he shifted gears. It would be good once again.